How does an NFL star go from being a first-round draft pick with a $1 million contract to completely vanishing from the sport in just 2 years? In 1985, the Green Bay Packers spent the sixth overall pick on a defensive back named Mossy Cade. By 1987, he was in prison, his career destroyed, and his name synonymous with one of the darkest scandals in NFL history. This isn't just another story about wasted talent. It's about how one man's horrific actions off the field led to his complete erasure from football memory. Mossy Jefferson Cade was born on April 2nd, 1961, in Elgin, Texas. From an early age, his athletic talent was obvious. But what path would lead this small-town Texas kid to become one of the most promising defensive prospects in college football? Growing up in the football-obsessed culture of Texas, Cade was a standout athlete at Elgin High School. His combination of size, speed, and instincts made him a natural on the football field. College recruiters quickly took notice, and Cade became a highly sought-after prospect. He chose to attend the University of Texas, joining the Longhorns in 1980. At Texas, Cade developed into one of the nation's premier defensive backs. During his college career, he recorded 13 interceptions and established himself as a shutdown corner with NFL potential. His final season with the Longhorns in 1983 saw him named an All-American, cementing his status as a top draft prospect. But behind this rising star, were there any warning signs of what would come later? Former teammates and coaches have never indicated any concerning behavior during his college years. By all accounts, Cade was considered a model student athlete at Texas. The 1984 NFL Draft should have been the crowning moment of Cade's football journey. But what happened instead would set in motion a bizarre series of events that foreshadowed his eventual downfall. Cade was selected by the San Diego Chargers in the supplemental draft. However, he never played a down for them. Why? Because he had already signed a contract with the Memphis Showboats of the rival USFL. This created a legal mess. The Chargers still held his NFL rights, but Cade was playing in another league. He spent the 1984 and 1985 seasons with the Showboats, where he performed well but not spectacularly. When the USFL folded after the 1985 season, Cade's rights were still owned by the Chargers. But here's where things get even more complicated. Instead of joining San Diego, the Chargers traded his rights to the Green Bay Packers. The Packers gave up their first-round pick, the sixth overall selection, a player, and future considerations to acquire Cade. Think about that for a moment. A team gave up a top 10 draft pick for a player who had never played a down in the NFL. The expectations for Cade in Green Bay were enormous. But would he live up to them? Mossy Cade finally made his NFL debut with the Packers in 1985. How did this highly touted prospect perform when he finally reached the big stage? Cade's on-field performance was solid, if not spectacular. In his rookie season, he started 12 games, recording 4 interceptions and showing the coverage skills that had made him such a valued prospect. In his second season, 1986, he continued to be a regular starter in the Packers' secondary. By the numbers, Cade appeared to be developing into a quality NFL defensive back. In just 27 games over 2 seasons, he recorded 6 interceptions and seemed to be growing more comfortable at the professional level. But no one could have predicted that his final NFL game would come on November 16th, 1986. At just 25 years old, what could possibly end a promising career so abruptly? In November 1986, shocking news broke that would forever change Mossy Cade's life and legacy. What happened in that fateful month that transformed him from an NFL starter to a criminal defendant? Cade was arrested and charged with second-degree sexual assault. The victim was his 41-year-old aunt by marriage. According to court documents, the assaults occurred in 1985 when she visited Cade's home in De Pere, Wisconsin, near Green Bay. The details of the case were disturbing. The victim testified that Cade had assaulted her 3 times over a 24-hour period. She had come to Wisconsin to visit him after her husband, Cade's uncle, had passed away. Upon his arrest, the Packers placed Cade on a leave of absence. The NFL, which at that time had no formal personal conduct policy, allowed the team to make this decision. The trial began in April 1987 and lasted for 2 weeks. During the proceedings, Cade's defense claimed the sexual encounter was consensual, a claim the jury ultimately rejected. In a time before the Me Too movement, when victims of sexual assault often faced intense scrutiny, the fact that the jury sided with the victim speaks volumes about the evidence presented. On May 13, 1987, the jury reached its verdict. How would this decision seal Cade's fate? The jury found Mossy Cade guilty on 3 counts of second-degree sexual assault. The verdict was unanimous, and on June 2, 1987, Cade was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The response from the Green Bay Packers was swift and decisive. The team immediately terminated his contract. The NFL made no public statement, as this predated the league's formal personal conduct policy, but Cade was effectively blacklisted. Cade began serving his sentence at the Waupun Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. While incarcerated, any dreams of returning to professional football evaporated. He served 15 months of his 2-year sentence before being released on parole in August 1988. But what about the victim? The psychological trauma she experienced didn't end with the conviction. In a 1989 interview with the Green Bay Press-Gazette, she expressed that the assault had destroyed her life. She spoke about suffering from depression, anxiety, and trust issues. The case predated many of the victim support systems that exist today, and she largely had to deal with the aftermath on her own. The conviction also had ripple effects through the NFL. While it didn't immediately lead to policy changes, it became part of a pattern of incidents that eventually pushed the league to develop more comprehensive approaches to personal conduct issues. But that would come much later. In 1987, the handling of such cases was left almost entirely to individual teams. After his release from prison, where did Mossy Cade go? And why has his name faded from memory unlike other NFL players involved in scandals? Following his release from prison in 1988, Mossy Cade essentially disappeared from public view. Unlike many former NFL players who remain connected to the sport through coaching, broadcasting, or public appearances, Cade vanished completely. There were no comeback attempts, no public statements, no interviews, no social media presence in later years. Mossy Cade simply disappeared from the public consciousness. But why such a complete vanishing act? Part of this was undoubtedly by design. The severity and nature of his crime made him toxic to the sports world. No team would consider bringing him back, even after he served his sentence. The media had little interest in redemption stories at that time, particularly for crimes of this nature. But another factor was timing. Cade's case occurred before the 24/7 sports news cycle, before the internet, before social media. It was possible to disappear in a way that would be almost unimaginable for a modern athlete facing similar circumstances. Public records indicate that Cade returned to his home state of Texas after his release. Beyond that, information about his life after football is scarce. There are no reliable reports about his employment, family life, or any efforts at rehabilitation or community service. This complete disappearance is unusual even for disgraced athletes. Many others who have committed serious crimes have eventually resurfaced in some capacity, whether through redemption narratives, tell-all books, or continued legal troubles. But not Cade. His vanishing act has been so complete that he's become almost mythical, a cautionary tale more than a remembered person. But what impact did this case leave on the teams that had invested so much in him? The fallout from the Mossy Cade case reverberated through multiple franchises. For the Green Bay Packers, the damage went beyond just losing a player. The Packers had made an enormous investment in Cade, trading away the 6th overall pick in the 1986 draft, plus additional compensation. That pick could have been used on other defensive standouts available that year, like Leslie O'Neal or Tim McDonald, players who went on to have long, successful NFL careers. Instead, they got just 27 games from Cade before his career ended in disgrace. The wasted draft capital set the struggling franchise back during a period when they were already floundering. The Packers finished with a losing record in 1986 and continued to struggle until the arrival of Brett Favre in the 1990s. For the San Diego Chargers, the Kaed situation represented a bizarre footnote. They had drafted him but never saw him play a down for their team. While they recovered some value by trading him to Green Bay, the entire episode was emblematic of the organizational dysfunction that plagued the Chargers during portions of the 1980s. The Memphis Showboats of the USFL, where Kaed played before joining the NFL, folded along with the league shortly after Kaed left. While his criminal case had nothing to do with the USFL's demise, it became part of the league's complicated legacy. A talented player who used the alternative league as a stepping stone before his career imploded in the NFL. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the NFL's approach to personal conduct. The Kaed case, along with other incidents during this period, eventually contributed to the league developing more comprehensive policies regarding player behavior off the field. Speaking of the NFL's policies, how does the handling of Kaed's case compare to more recent incidents of a similar nature? The way the NFL handled the Mossy Kaed case in 1986 to 87 stands in stark contrast to how such a situation would be managed today. What's changed in the decades since? When Kaed was arrested, there was no NFL personal conduct policy. The league largely left disciplinary matters to individual teams. The Packers placed Kaed on leave and then terminated his contract after the conviction, but the NFL itself took no formal action. Today, such a case would trigger an immediate investigation by the league. The NFL would likely place the player on the commissioner's exempt list, meaning he would continue to be paid but could not participate in games or practices while the legal process unfolded. The current NFL personal conduct policy, significantly strengthened in 2014 following the Ray Rice incident, explicitly addresses sexual assault. A conviction on sexual assault charges would result in a baseline suspension of 6 games for a first offense, with the possibility of a much longer suspension based on aggravating factors. In Kaed's case, given the serious nature of the crime and the conviction on multiple counts, he would likely face a suspension of at least a full season under today's standards, possibly even a permanent ban from the league. Social media and the 24/7 news cycle would also completely transform how such a case played out publicly. In 1986, news of Kaed's arrest and trial was primarily limited to newspaper reports and brief mentions on sports broadcasts. Today, every development would be analyzed exhaustively across multiple platforms, with public opinion forming and shifting in real time. Teams are now much more cautious about acquiring players with any history of domestic violence or sexual assault. The risk to a franchise's reputation and brand has become a major consideration in personnel decisions. It's unlikely that a player with pending sexual assault charges would be traded for valuable draft picks, as Kaed was before his case went to trial. But what can we learn from this case that still resonates today? The Mossy Kaed story, though largely forgotten by casual NFL fans, contains important lessons that remain relevant decades later. First, it reminds us that athletic talent doesn't equal character. Kaed was a first-round talent whose on-field promise blinded teams to any potential red flags. This pattern has repeated itself countless times since, with teams often prioritizing talent over character concerns. Second, it demonstrates how quickly and completely a promising career can be destroyed by actions off the field. Kaed went from NFL starter to convicted felon to complete obscurity in less than 2 years. His story stands as a stark reminder of how rapidly fortunes can change. Third, it highlights how the handling of sexual assault cases has evolved over time. In the mid-1980s, such cases received far less attention and scrutiny than they would today. The support systems for victims were less developed, and the public conversation around sexual violence was much more limited. Perhaps most importantly, Kaed's case shows how sports organizations have had to develop more robust approaches to character evaluation and off-field behavior. While problems certainly still exist, teams now invest far more resources in vetting prospects and monitoring player conduct than they did in Kaed's era. For the victim, the case represents something entirely different, a traumatic experience that altered her life forever. Her courage in coming forward at a time when doing so was even more difficult than it is today deserves recognition. Ultimately, the legacy of Mossy Kaed is that of potential squandered and lives damaged through terrible decisions. His name has become a footnote in NFL history, mentioned primarily as a cautionary tale rather than for any on-field accomplishments. The story of Mossy Cade isn't just about a talented football player who threw away his career. It's about the devastating consequences of sexual violence, the evolution of how sports leagues handle criminal behavior, and how quickly someone can disappear from public consciousness. Cade's football career, spanning from the University of Texas to the USFL to the NFL, lasted just 7 years in total. His NFL career was even briefer, consisting of just 27 games over 2 seasons. Yet the impact of his actions extended far beyond those brief playing days. For the victim, the effects were life-altering and permanent. For the teams that invested in him, particularly the Packers, his crimes represented a significant setback. For the NFL, his case became part of the backdrop against which the league eventually developed more comprehensive approaches to personal conduct. Today, as sports leagues continue to grapple with how to address criminal behavior by athletes, the Mossy Cade story remains relevant. It reminds us that behind the statistics, draft positions, and game highlights are human beings making choices with real consequences. In the end, Mossy Cade vanished not because people forgot about him, but because his actions made him someone no one wanted to remember. His absence from football's collective memory isn't accidental. It's the result of a sport and its fans choosing to move on from one of its darkest chapters. The final question this story leaves us with is sobering. How many similar cases from the past remain largely forgotten, their victims' stories untold? And what responsibility do we have to remember these stories? Not to glorify the perpetrators, but to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated in the future?